Tired of shows that bark and scream at you? This is the show that speaks to you.
Here's the game plan.
It's the Big E Sports Extravaganza, where we go inside the issues, present a variety of topics, and feature some of the biggest sports guests on the planet. Now, here's the one and only, award-winning Elissa Walker Campbell.
Hey, welcome into the Big E Sports Show. I'm your host, Elissa Walker Campbell, and joining me now is Monte Burke, New York Times bestselling author and the author of Men of Troy, a definitive look at Pete Carroll's USC dynasty and one of the most dominant eras in college football history. Monte's reporting goes beyond the wins and trophies. It explores leadership, belief, culture, and the people who built truly something special. Monte, first time on the show. Welcome in. It's so great to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I know you have covered many different major sports stories. So what specifically drew you to the Pete Carroll USC era? What was the inspiration of the book?
I just think it's I think it's a unique era. It never happened before, and it'll never happen again. So you had this coach in Pete Carroll who was really trying some unconventional things. He, had a mix of sort of psychology and Far Eastern mysticism, and he was very much a player's coach, which at the time, in particular, was a derogatory term. He'd been fired twice in the NFL, and he comes to this downtrodden program, and they have this. Build, and then they win 2 championships in a row, and they come about 6 inches from winning 3 in a row, which has never happened before in modern college football. And he just built this vibe. There were no NFL teams in Los Angeles at the time, and Hollywood loves winners. So all of a sudden, you had Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell and the Fonz and Arnold and all these people not only going to games, they're going to practices as well. So he kind of created, during this time was this incredible sort of vibe that was created. And then, of course, it all fell apart with a scandal at the end. So to me, it was just this fascinating, 9-year period that had not really been fully written about. And so intriguing to me.
Well, in the book, Men of Troy, you do portray Pete Carroll as more than a coach, almost a cultural architect. So kind of pull back the curtain. What separated him from his peers at that moment in college football history?
Yeah, so his like I said before, he had a very unconventional kind of way of coaching, and it hadn't worked to that point, but it did work. He was fired twice and then out of football for a year, and he kind of figured out what he was going to do, and then arrives in college where younger, more impressionable men, and at that time very captive audience. So unlike now, kids would stay for 3 or 4 years, and it just started to work there. And he kind of inverted the natural order of coaching. Most coaches are sort of like the Nick Saban type, the militaristic type. He was not like that. Most coaches are the bad cop, and they have their assistant coaches are the kind of good cops. They yell at a player, and the assistant coach will go over later and say, "It's okay, this is what he meant." Pete Carroll totally inverted that. He was the good cop. He had a bunch of enforcers on his staff. So, it was just this incredible thing. And like I said before, with all those kind of celebrities being the toast of the town, he was the king of LA, really. It made for this incredible vibe, but also this incredible recruiting machine. I mean, imagine being a high school kid visiting on your recruiting trip to USC and meeting Snoop Dogg. You're probably going to USC.
Hey, we are so glad you're with us on the Big E Sports Show. I'm your host, Elissa Walker Campbell, going one-on-one with the author of Men of Troy, the epic afternoons, wild nights, and enduring legacy of Pete Carroll's USC Trojan. Monte Burke is with us. And so you talked a little bit about some of the firings, the hirings, the adversity that head coach Pete Carroll, endured and went through. Let's share a little bit about as far as his coaching style. How much of that was shaped by that adversity, those early failures, particularly in the NFL?
So much of it, actually. So when he was down to his third strike, really. If you get fired 3 times as a head coach in a relatively short period of time, you're probably done as a head coach. Probably a lifetime coordinator at that point. He didn't want that. So he put his ego aside when he first got to USC, and he hired just an all-star staff. He held on to Ed Orgeron, who arguably is the best defensive line coach in college football history. He developed Warren Sapp and Russell Maryland in previous stops. He hired a guy named Norm Chow, who had been the offensive coordinator at BYU and had tutored Jim McMahon and Steve Young and Ty Detmer. And then he hired these two young guys who weren't much older than the players they were coaching in Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian, who were a little rough around the edges, I guess, at the beginning, but of course have blossomed into two of the brightest young, or now not young, middle-aged coaches in college football.
You know, you do write in the book how Pete Carroll embraced psychology and that mindset. At that period in college football, how far ahead was he in that particular arena?
I think he was really far ahead in all of football, even the NFL. And in fact, he was so far ahead that, the owner of the Jets, where he got fired, and the owner of the Patriots, Robert Kraft, just did not understand, where he also got fired, just did not understand him. He was way, way far ahead. Since then, a lot of people have caught up. I mean, being a player's coach is not quite the derogatory term that it used to be. And the use of psychology is widespread in the sport now. So I think he was way, way ahead of his time. And then, he went on to prove that it could work in the NFL as well when he went on to the Seahawks and won a Super Bowl there.
Absolutely. We are so glad you're with us on the Big East Sports Show, going one-on-one with Monte Burke. The title of his book is Men of Troy. In doing all of your reporting, what did players tell you about the internal culture at USC that perhaps folks like myself, media and fans, that we never saw? Yeah,
the overwhelming thing I came away with was that it was fun. And this very much dovetails into Pete Carroll's approach. He believed, unlike the more militaristic kind of coaching model that's out there with Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, Carroll believed that having people have fun is how they reach their peak performance. So I can't tell you how many players, but also assistant coaches talked about that atmosphere of fun and high kinetic and, moving around really quickly. And, a lot of players would say, playing under Carroll felt like, I was 12 years old again in my backyard playing shirts and skin touch football. I mean, that's how fun it was. It was creative and high energy, but most of all fun.
So winning became the expectation. Did the players share with you just how did they handle the weight of being you got to win each and every week, the pressure of that? Yeah. What did they share?
It's really hard. I mean, I think Nick Saban has sort of skewed our view of how hard it is to not only reach the mountaintop, but then stay up there. I actually have a chapter in the book called Surviving Greatness. And, one of the sort of overarching kind of themes to this book is how hard it is to stay on top. And USC suffered from that as well. I mean, after that loss in that famous game against Texas, when Vince Young kind of took over the game, but USC literally came within 6 inches of kind of clinching the game. They had some sort of stumbles. It was harder and harder to maintain that greatness. And then, of course, it all kind of fell apart at the very end. But, that greatness is again, just been, these dynasties have a shelf life. Again, Nick Saban kind of did it differently, and to compare anyone else to what he did at Alabama is kind of crazy. But what happened at USC is kind of the normal shelf life, I think, for the dynasty. But it's really fascinating to delve into, why these things don't last.
Monte, do you see similarities between Pete Carroll and Nick Saban with these two particular programs?
What's funny is on the surface, no. Because they're completely different coaches. The way they built, just the way they kind of acted. Like I said before, Saban being the more militaristic guy, Carroll being the more players coach. But what's interesting is their backgrounds are fairly similar. They were both undersized players in college who had wanted to play at the NFL level, but they were undersized, and they both played safety. And they were both sort of, started for their college teams because they were very smart. And being a safety, of course, you see the kind of the better view of the entire kind of play of the field there. So, and then of course they were both defensive geniuses. So there are some similarities kind of in the way that they got there. Once they got into the coaching profession, the similarities sort of stopped.
When I think of USC, I think of those explosive offenses. But what was the foundation? Was it really defense?
What's interesting is when Carroll got to USC, the Pac-10, as it was called back then, was not known for defense. In fact, I used to love being here on the East Coast, checking in at 11 o'clock and watching, Pac-10 go crazy at night, because it was always just some crazy quarterbacks running around and offensive 54 to 52 kind of games, know. But Carroll really brought a defensive mindset to the Pac-10. I think the offenses obviously get a lot more, of the press. Of course, you had Reggie Bush, who was a once-in-a-generational player. You had a string of great quarterbacks from Carson Palmer to Matt Leinart to Mark Sanchez. But the defense really was it's an underrated part of the story. The defense was just incredible. I mean, starting with guys like Troy Polamalu, but going through linebackers like Keith Rivers and Clay Matthews and Brian Cushing. To a certain degree, USC was always known as tailback U. By the time Carroll left, it was sort of more like linebacker U.
Right. We are winding down our time. Men of Troy, go ahead and get a copy. The Epic Afternoons, Wild Nights, and Enduring Legacy of Pete Carroll's USC Trojans. We've been going one-on-one with the author, and that is Monte Burke. Monte, congratulations. And when college football rolls around, again, we look forward to catching up with you here in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
You bet.